All right, let's dive into something you probably weren't expecting: Buddhist political thought. Seriously, we're going to explore this fascinating idea that the path to enlightenment might actually double as a blueprint for how to run an entire society.
I mean, let's be honest. When you hear the word Buddhism, your mind probably goes to meditation, right? Monasteries, spiritual goals, that kind of thing. And look, you're not wrong, but you're also not getting the full picture. Because it turns out, hidden away in these ancient texts, there's a really distinct political philosophy. It's a whole school of thought that had kings, even back in the Buddhist time, coming to them for advice on how to be a good ruler. It's a completely different way of looking at power and the state.
So where does the state even come from in the first place, according to Buddhist thinking? Well, it's not about chaos, and it's not about some god deciding things. It actually starts with a very, very human problem.
And right away we see this huge difference from other traditions. For example, in a lot of Hindu political thought, the state is created to stop chaos, a world where it's just might makes right. But Buddhist texts, like the Dighanikaya, they tell a totally different story. For them, the state was a direct response to corruption, something that grew out of greed and materialism.
So here's how it plays out. First, people get the idea of private property. That leads to greed, which leads to theft, and things just start to go downhill morally speaking. Eventually, people have had enough. They demand some kind of order. So they all agree to give a piece of what they grow to one person, and in return, that person will make sure there's justice. And that person is the Maha Sammata.
This is such a cool concept. The ruler isn't some divine figure. They are the great elect, chosen by the people. It's basically a social contract. Right from the start, you can see the strong democratic, almost republican vibe, where power comes from the bottom up, not the top down.
Okay, so the king is elected by the people. But what makes a good king? Well, this is where Buddhist thought gives us a picture of a ruler who's way more of a philosopher than a warrior.
The ideal king is called an Atmajit, one who has conquered himself. And this is so important. The idea is, before you can even think about ruling a kingdom, you have to be able to rule your own ego, your own desires. The king should be compassionate, wise, and get this, loved, not feared. Their whole job isn't just to punish people, but to actually make society better. It sounds a lot like Plato's philosopher king, doesn't it?
But even with this ideal, there's a deep suspicion of power. I love this quote from the poet Ashvaghosha. A kingdom is like a lotus pond filled with crocodiles. It looks beautiful, but it is packed with hidden dangers. The whole pursuit of power is seen as being totally at odds with finding inner peace.
So you might be thinking, is this ideal king just some fantasy? Well, Buddhist tradition actually points to a real historical person who they say came the closest, Emperor Ashoka, way back in the 3rd century BCE. He's held up as the ultimate role model for a king trying to rule with genuine wisdom.
And we know about his vision because he literally carved it into stone pillars all over his empire. I mean, just look at these principles. Rule ethically, serve all of humanity, promote tolerance between religions, and maybe most famous of all, after this one incredibly bloody war, he completely gave up on military conquest and instead pursued Dhamma Vijaya, conquest through righteousness. He really tried to make this philosophy a state policy.
All right, so now let's zoom out a bit. To really get what makes Buddhist political thought so unique, it helps to put it side by side with the broader Hindu tradition that it grew out of.
First off, the basic worldview is just different. Buddhism is fundamentally otherworldly. The main goal is to escape the cycle of suffering and reach nirvana. Hindu tradition, while it has liberation as an ultimate goal too, is much more this-worldly. It's about balancing duty, wealth, desire, and spirituality all at once. And that one difference changes literally everything that follows.
So that difference in worldview flows right into how you think about government. Early Buddhism was all about republican ideas. They modeled their state on the Sangha, their community of monks, where big decisions were made together. Hindu tradition, on the other hand, usually leans into a monarchical system, with a huge focus on the specific duties and powers of the king himself.
And this leads to a huge clash in how they approach politics. Buddhism is deeply idealist. It puts nonviolence and moral purity above everything else. Hindu political thought, especially if you read something like the Arthashastra, is way more realist. It's super pragmatic, it accepts the power struggles are just a part of life, and gives a king strategies to stay in control, sometimes using methods that are, let's say, pretty Machiavellian.
And you see this in foreign policy too. The Buddhist ideal is pacifist. It's about winning people over with moral influence, not with an army. The Hindu tradition is very geopolitically aware. It's got detailed strategies for making alliances, for diplomacy, and yeah,
for war when you need it. It's all about protecting and even expanding the kingdom.
So let's just pull this all together for a second. What we're seeing are two totally different blueprints for society. On one side, you have a vision that's otherworldly, republican, idealist, and pacifist. And on the other, one that's this-worldly, monarchical, realist, and strategic. Both are incredibly deep traditions, but they give very, very different answers for how to run a country.
So after all that, what's the one big idea that ties all of Buddhist political thinking together? Well, it all boils down to one incredibly powerful concept.
And that concept is Dhamma. Now, Dhamma is more than just a set of laws. Think of it as the cosmic principle of what's right and just. And in politics, Dhamma is the ultimate check on a ruler's power. It's the moral compass that makes sure the state isn't just about control, but about creating moral and social good.
And here it is, the key takeaway. In this way of thinking, virtues like compassion and integrity, they aren't just nice-to-haves for a leader. They are the entire basis for whether a state is even legitimate. If a king loses that moral compass, if they get greedy or cruel, they lose their right to rule. Ethical leadership isn't an optional extra, it is the absolute foundation.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question for our own world, doesn't it? When we look at our modern era of power politics and realism, we have to ask, is the idea of a truly ethical state just some noble, idealistic dream? Or is it maybe a necessary goal that we should all be striving for? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.